Welcome to episode 7 of my 2022 training diaries, documenting my training in lead up to my first race, a 7-day staged race in the country of Georgia in June, followed by UTMB in the Alps late August. If you're new to the channel, my name is Jeff Pelletier, and this week I'm going to address some of the questions that I had around heart rate-based training in my episode a couple of weeks ago about the benefits of speed work for ultra runners. And more specifically, I'll be explaining why I no longer train with heart rate and what I recommend doing instead. I'll also be talking about some of the new run nutrition products that I've been testing over the last week from a brand called Untapped. But first, as always, let's talk about this last week of training. So Monday was a rest day as usual, followed on Tuesday by an easy 75 minutes on the trails. Wednesday, I had 2 big workouts on the schedule, both a speed work session and a strength training session in the gym. For my speed work, I decided to run on the track, and Audrey joined me as well for her own workout. We did a warm-up on some nearby trails first, and then I was scheduled to do 2 sets of 10 minutes at tempo effort, with 5 minutes of easy running in between, followed by 3 sets of 3 minutes at maximum effort with a 3-minute recovery, and finally a cool down. But my left hamstring was feeling a little bit tight still from the back-to-back long runs that I did last weekend, so I decided to back off a little and to skip my second 10-minute tempo interval so I could save it for those all-out intervals instead. For my strength training session, I also backed off a little as well in terms of the number of sets, and we modified a couple of the exercises to avoid overworking the hamstrings, and then added in some extra mobility work instead. It's always important to listen to your body in cases like this to avoid injury, and I was perfectly willing to bail out on my speed work session altogether had I felt that hamstring getting any worse, but it seemed to handle it okay. Thursday, I then did 75 minutes of easy running on the trails, and while I was a little bit stiff at the start, I ended up feeling great towards the end. Friday, I did my second strength training session in the gym, but I had no running on the schedule at all. Saturday was then my longest scheduled run of the season so far at 6 hours, and I did this with a 10-pound pack, just like my 5-hour run 2 weeks ago. It was a beautiful weekend, so I set out from our home here in North Vancouver to run across the bridge and onto the Trans-Canada Trail heading east, which would take me up and over Burnaby Mountain, and then down to Burnaby Lake, where I do a loop before retracing my steps all the way back home. I actually decided to test out a new pack this time, the Salomon XA35, which is quite a bit bigger than the 25-liter pack that I used in Namibia. My route was mostly crushed gravel with a bit of pavement and some small sections of single track. Okay, so 5 hours in, I've run about 49 kilometers and I'm feeling good, which bodes well. It shows that the progression has been working. Hey there. So yeah, it's a good sign. I feel like I could keep going for a few hours if I had to. In the end, I ran just over 60 kilometers or about 37 miles with 1,160 meters of elevation gain or 3,800 feet in just over 6 hours. I ate a total of 1,250 calories, so just over 200 an hour, and drank about 3.5 liters of water, which was just right. Hi.
How's it going?
Good. Audrey joined me on her gravel bike to keep me company for the last 10 kilometers or so. and I finished feeling surprisingly good. It was just the last few kilometers where I was suffering a little bit and reduced to more of a shuffle. Sunday, we got up early and went paddleboarding here in Deep Cove. It was actually my first time ever on a stand-up paddleboard, and I didn't fall in the water once, so I'd say that was a success. We were actually out testing some new inflatable paddleboards we just got, courtesy of Goose Hill, so stay tuned for the full video from that. I then hit the trails for about 75 minutes of easy running, which I treated more as a recovery run after my big effort the day before. So overall during the week, I ran 103 kilometers or 64 miles with just over 2,000 meters or 6,650 feet of elevation gain plus equal descent. And special thanks to Untapped for fueling me this week. They're a company based in Vermont in the United States with the line of products made from strictly organic ingredients like maple syrup, raspberries, real lemons, and coffee. Their founder, Ted, was a professional road cyclist who wanted to create a better tasting, performing, and digesting alternative to the mostly synthetic products on the market. They make a series of waffles, energy gels, including some with caffeine, and drink mixes, both in liquid and powder form. And they are all super delicious. So if you want to try them for yourself, I've got a discount code for you that will get you 15% off with a minimum purchase of $25. So as I said, I've had lots of questions over the past few weeks about heart rate-based training. Specifically, like how to calculate the heart rate zones that I talk about so often, like zone 3 for my tempo runs. I started training with heart rate just a few years into my running career, when I began training at a facility here in Burnaby called the Peak Center for Human Performance. I would go there for coaching and they'd handle all of my training programs, which were all based around the concept of training different energy systems based on the data that they'd collect on me on an ongoing basis.
So it was to be tight, but not uncomfortably so?
So once every few months, I would go in to get a VO2 max and lactic threshold test done on a treadmill, where I'd wear a special mask to measure oxygen consumption. And I'd then have blood drawn at regular intervals so that they could measure my blood lactate levels at different intensities. These tests will provide you with an accurate reading of your VO2 max, which is the maximum amount of oxygen that an athlete can utilize during exercise. Now, this is determined largely by genetics though, and it actually changes very little over time, dropping very slowly as we age. But there are two other thresholds that do fluctuate much more frequently: your aerobic threshold and your anaerobic threshold. Your aerobic threshold is the level of effort where the level of lactate in the blood starts to rise. So below this is the level at which you can run for hours on end. So as endurance athletes, this is where we should be spending most of our time in training, especially on our longer runs. So it's important to know where this threshold is. But as exercise intensity increases, we start to rely more and more on anaerobic sources to supply our muscles with energy, while also switching from predominantly slow twitch muscle fibers to a growing proportion of fast twitch fibers. And this in turn results in the formation of lactate within the muscles, which can actually be used as fuel, and we can train our muscles to do this more effectively. But at high levels, this is what leads to that feeling of muscles burning and will lead to fatigue. Our anaerobic or lactate threshold is the point at which your body begins producing this lactic acid faster than it can be metabolized. And once we hit this point, it's like a ticking time bomb where the fatigue increases at a higher and higher rate until we're forced to slow down or to stop altogether. Now, training at or just below this threshold can help us to improve it as well, allowing us to run faster for longer, while making room for us to, in turn, develop a larger aerobic base by also raising our aerobic threshold. Now, the results of these tests will typically be provided as both a pace and a heart rate zone. The pace, of course, is only applicable for running on flat surfaces, while the heart rate target might be better for use on the trails. So for example, I was doing weekly track sessions with the coaching team from the lab as well, which was great because the coach would have already taken my most recent results and would have translated them into estimated track times. He'd actually read these times out with a stopwatch and would let me know how I was doing based on these targets, which were often as fast as a minute 12 per 400-meter lap of the track. Now, just a side note here, at the Peak Center, we trained with a 5-zone system, with 1 being marathon pace and 5 being an all-out sprint. And unfortunately, there exists 6-zone systems and likely others, which can really lead to confusion when speaking with other athletes who might be working under a different methodology. But those aerobic and anaerobic thresholds, as well as your VO2 max, are what really matter. Now, I always noticed a drop in these thresholds after taking more than a week or two off, say after recovering from a big race, or maybe an injury, or even just a vacation. But as your fitness improves throughout a season from doing speed work, your thresholds are likely to improve as well. That's the whole point of doing speed work. So I would typically get tested in the lab every few months, no matter what, to make sure that I wasn't training with outdated targets. Many modern GPS watches now have wrist-based optical heart rate monitors built right in. Most watches are also compatible with chest-based heart rate monitors, which are much more accurate than the wrist-based ones. But this data is completely useless if you don't already know what heart rate you should be targeting for a given effort. Now, it's been years since I've had one of these tests done, since the Peak Center here closed down in Vancouver, and that's why I no longer bother training with heart rate, because it can actually be counterproductive to train based on the numbers if the numbers are wrong. Plus, heart rate can actually fluctuate in the short term based on a number of factors like fatigue, stress, or even just caffeine intake. Not to mention that it's a lagging indicator to begin with, and it can take a minute for your heart rate to catch up to your level of effort during a hard workout. Again, that's why at the Peak Center, we also used corresponding pace targets or lap times for our intensity work. So where does that leave us when it comes to figuring out what effort we should run at when doing things like speed work? Well, there are formulas we can use, like subtracting your age from 220 to first determine your maximum heart rate, and then applying percentages to this figure to determine your target heart rate for different thresholds. But in my experience, these are so inaccurate that they're basically useless. I compared these formulas once to the data that I was getting in the lab, and it was laughable how far off it was. Not to mention that it doesn't account for those changes in fitness throughout a season that we discussed before. But there are some test runs that you can do at the track to help determine your current fitness levels. Or you can do some calculations based on some recent race results. But in my experience, determining your actual heart rate zones with any accuracy is just really difficult to do outside of a controlled laboratory environment. I find the best solution is to simply run based on perceived effort using what's commonly referred to as the talk test. Now, this can be translated into what's called the Rating of Perceived Exertion, or RPE scale, which is a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being basically at rest and 10 being your maximum effort. In fact, this is how my coach Eric prescribes my workouts to me. So take the speed work session that I did on Wednesday here at the track. For my tempo intervals, I was targeting an 8 on the RPE scale, meaning I should only be able to speak about a sentence at a time. For the shorter maximal intervals, I was targeting 10 RPE, meaning that I couldn't talk at all and I was literally just holding on for dear life. Perceived exertion also controls for those changes in your fitness throughout a season, as well as other environmental factors like heat or altitude. Because if these things are going to make running a certain speed feel harder on one day than on another, then that's exactly what we're trying to factor in. Because effort is relative, and that's the whole point. Having observed dozens of runners over the years while I was training at the lab, there are 2 things that tend to be true. The first is that many of us tend to run our slow runs way too fast. There's a pace that feels comfortably hard, typically close to that kind of half marathon effort that many of us tend to fall into for a lot of our shorter runs. Because it feels good to push ourselves just that little bit too hard. It makes us feel like we're really working. So it's important to keep our easy runs nice and easy. Now, the second thing is that we tend to run our hard efforts too slow. I was often surprised, at least at first, by how fast some of my own targets were being set for my speed work at the track. But once I mentally adjusted to this effort, I was able to hit them, at least occasionally. When we say that you should be running at a conversational pace during an easy run, make sure that you can actually have a conversation. But for those hard efforts, make sure that you're really pushing yourself as well. You can use the talk test even when you're alone, but hey, maybe this is another reason to run with a friend so that it's more natural to be measuring effort with words, especially for those hard efforts where it never hurts to have a little bit of friendly competition. So I hope you found that interesting. There's a lot more to unpack here when it comes to heart rate-based training, and I do plan on dedicating a few more in-depth videos to it in the future. In fact, in preparing for this video, I realized that it's probably about time that I get back in the lab for another VO2 max and lactic threshold test myself. So I'll be sure to take you all along with me when I do. As always, I want to hear from my supporting channel members with any questions you might have about my training. So be sure to leave those in the comments below. You can become a channel member if you haven't already by clicking the join button from a web browser. If you found this video helpful, give it a like and subscribe to be notified of future episodes. And I will talk to you all next week.